Welcome to my review of Alistair MacLean's Puppet on a Chain, a 1969 novel that follows the adventures, or perhaps misadventures is more accurate, of Paul Sherman. Sherman is an Interpol agent in what one assumes is some sort of parallel universe where Interpol agents run around foreign nations, riling up the local drug lords and occasionally the police in order to get their man. He arrives in Amsterdam with two impossibly beautiful assistants to meet an informant and is immediately sucked into the violence of the drug smuggling ring to be investigated. He sets himself up in the Hotel Rembrandt, an establishment known for leaking the secrets of their guest, a location Sherman has chosen for its poorest position as the local information hub. Investigating a lead leads to the death of a possible informant, and Sherman handles the situation with the aplomb and subtlety of Connery's Bond. His wry observations of all and sundry are one of the book's early highlights, but as he confesses to the local police chief, he doesn't have a plan that extends beyond rattling cages and busting heads until somebody loses their cool and gives themselves away. The following investigation is an unflattering depiction of Amsterdam as a place of drug abuse, seedy businessmen and narrow claustrophobic streets where the overhanging buildings all seem to be on the verge of collapse. He roughs up informers, seems a step ahead of the local gangsters' attempts to keep him at bay, and investigates the most convoluted and unlikely drug smuggling organisation I've read about that involves an entire Dutch village being in on the scheme and willing to murder, or at least ignore a murder, for it to continue. River barges ferrying drugs about, smuggled in hollowed out Bibles and puppets, and naturally in the best Bond traditions, Sherman, despite being scarred at the book's outset and repeatedly beaten throughout in its final third, still manages to get the girl and kill the baddies. The opening of this book is just about the perfect opening of a spy thriller. We are introduced to the scarred Sherman with a variety of hints at what he does, and he talks about his business trips as arduous and dangerous. His observations of the passengers on the plane into Schiphol reveals him to be some sort of agent, but it takes time in revealing exactly what type and keeps that mystery fogged up in hints of the high stakes and the danger to his life. MacLean builds all this expertly, starting with hints of mystery, the involvement of a French assistant, also in some sort of law enforcement or security, the exotic choice of Amsterdam as a location. It gives this an international flavour. His scars, the result of a plane crash, add grit but also vulnerability and humanity. His impossibly beautiful companions bring glamour and some casual sexism, very much in the Connery Bond mould. Just when he's finished describing the stakes and danger, he punctuates this introduction with cold-blooded murder. A murder that Sherman describes as the most diabolically cold-blooded execution I'd heard of in a lifetime of listening to stories about people who had not met their end in the way the maker intended. And if you were wondering how to start this kind of novel, then Puppet on a Chain's first 11 pages are a little bit like a textbook example, perhaps a little bit too textbooky to fully shake the charge of being rather too derivative of Bond, but it is certainly a lively and engaging beginning. It might also be good enough for you not to notice the first signs that this novel has set itself up for a fall. The cold-blooded hit that accounts for Sherman's informant occurs with a single gunshot, while the shooter's accomplices prevent the man's escape by being crowded close behind him, a rather dangerous place to be if the man is shot from the front. Also, it sounds likely that they might have been close enough to have been able to kill him without attracting so much attention. You also rather hope that the bad guys, lauded for their calculated professionalism, have a good reason for not killing the one witness, Sherman, but there isn't a convincing reason for their leniency towards him that's offered in this book. The death of Sherman at this point might, after the build-up he was given, if nothing else, have been a really nice twist, and with Sherman out of the novel, his glamorous sidekicks elevated to a more leading role, this novel might have been something more than it is. But it is 1969, the same year as On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the sixth Bond film, and with Sherman very much treading Connery's waters, this seems more like an attempt to add a little franchise building of its own. Certainly the novel's two most striking sequences, a midnight marina shootout and the murder of one of the fringe characters, would really lend itself to a cinematic treatment, and there actually is a 1972 film version of this novel, but I haven't seen it and it did not become a franchise. And perhaps part of the reason behind that is that there is a distinct switching point in the novel, which comes from how MacLean has actually set Sherman up. In the early running, his cynical and disparaging eye misses nothing and offers some kind of witticism on everything. on his fear of flying and how to combat it, on the originality of his opponent's dialogue, and the cliches in his own. In the first half of the novel, there are far more hits than misses, and Sherman's exchanges with the hotel's assistant manager are very entertaining. Sherman's vivid summation of the entertainments in a salubrious nightclub he attends are a glorious example of the brutal cynicism he deploys. When he describes the nightclub's patrons and their enjoyment of the entertainment being offered them as the aesthetic nuances or symbolic significance of the original and thought-compelling ballet performance taking place before their enraptured eyes. He then goes on to add, the highlight of the evening was over. Great moments like those came but seldom, and the summits were to be rarely scaled again, except 3 times a night, 7 days a week. And when you couple that with the frustrated police liaison bitterly asking, do you make many friends in the course of a year, then we're not just combining the best of Bond, but perhaps also a touch of Marlowe. However, his visit to the club is also the turning point of the novel, and it comes with this line here. God knows I make more mistakes than you do. I did, and I was making one of my biggest then. Prior to this point, Sherman had at least appeared to have had a degree of control over proceedings, but it becomes clear that he actually didn't. Instead, his investigation is revealed to be little more than blundering from lead to lead and hampering rather than helping any kind of genuine investigation. And just as Sherman's investigation flip-flops on the reader, MacLean also seems to run out of steam, and it's hard to think of anything from Sherman's repertoire of quips and cynicisms that was really memorable after this point. Instead, you get some really horrific attempts like this. The bed was occupied by Maggie and Belinda, both sitting upright, both looking very fetching in very attractive night dresses which appear to consist mainly of holes. It's really dull and sort of cliched. It's also quite repetitive. There's very in there. It just feels like an author contriving rather than writing from inspiration. And we get this again later on with, I was to remember this with bitter chagrin on an occasion that was to be a day or so later and very much more inauspicious for me. It's like that's actually quite awkward to read aloud. It's quite awkward to read in the book. It's not just a question of like an idiosyncratic style, which MacLean certainly gives Sherman, but it reads like somebody attempting to be wordy and clever rather than actually being either of those things. And from this point, Sherman's efforts to crack the case only seem more unstructured, unplanned, and ineffective. This is rather the opposite of what you might expect a plot in this sort of book to look like, where the investigator has to follow leads, build a case, do some investigation that builds to a crisis point leading to a resolution. You tend to have an investigator gaining more idea of what's going on as the story moves this way, not less. And it may well be that this was deliberate, that MacLean was playing with conventions, because 1969 was the year of Her Majesty's Secret Service, and the makers of that, which was the 6th Bond film, they certainly had the idea that Fleming's franchise needed a shot in the arm of something a little bit different. Whether they were right or wrong, probably something for other YouTubers to decide. But from here, MacLean seems unsure if he's pastiching Fleming or parodying him. Sherman is found by bad guys while peering through a hole in the fence or a back window, far too often for somebody who has 2 underutilised assistants. Too often do the same bad guys acknowledge the tropes and cliches of their actions but continue to do them anyway. And we come back to that ruthless professionalism we were told that the bad guys had demonstrated in Act 1, and we start to wonder if we were told rather than shown. Because which one of these accomplices would you want to be when I shot the guy in the middle? And I hope the answer is none of them. They let Sherman go then, and will do so 2 or 3 times here, expecting an unnecessary complicated scheme will kill him, while others are simply dispatched. It becomes a nonsense that MacLean acknowledges when one bad guy tells Sherman, classically, my dear Sherman, when a person is in your position and has lost out and is about to die, it is customary for a person in my position to explain, in loving detail, just where the victim went wrong. But apart from the fact that your list of blunders is so long as to be too tedious to enumerate, I simply can't be bothered, so let's get on with it, shall we? But they don't actually get on with it, and the list of blunders, Mr. MacLean, is your plot. Sherman, at this point, is held at gunpoint while another bad guy ties him up from behind. And now surely that's the point at which you would fight back, because the presence of his accomplice behind you, would that not stop a gunman in front of you from shooting? Well, perhaps not, because it didn't at the start of this book. But the bad guys intended to beat him up and leave him in a barn that will then be burnt down later, and he naturally escapes. He finds the bad guys again, and they find him snooping again, and they tie him up with earphones on his head playing the amplified sound of hundreds of clocks in order to drive him mad and eventually into a coma. Now the henchman at this time even remarks it might be better just to shoot him, but the bad guy has other ideas, of course. He wants to tell him all about the plot over the course of about 4 pages, which is only 10 to 20 pages after he initially said that he wouldn't do that. While having at least 2 guns removed from him while he was being caught snooping in various places, Sherman resolves to tuck a pistol into his sock because, fool me twice, shame on me, fool me 3 times, and how the hell have I even survived this long? But yes, he is caught snooping again, and then after getting another pistol, he confronts the big bad, and he's relieved of that one as well. The second half of this book is a pale and mediocre shadow of the first. Just once it would have been nice for Sherman to have been rescued by one of his assistants instead of simply being strong enough or lucky enough to escape the ridiculous situations he was placed in. But Maggie and Belinda are badly underused in Puppet on a Chain, often excluded from Sherman's bumbling. They occasionally warn him against his schemes. In one truly horribly misjudged scene, they even seem to offer him a menage a trois to prevent him from rushing headlong into another dangerous situation. But in truth, they serve little purpose in the story beyond being an awkward banter foil and somebody to be in peril when the innocent Dutch girl Astrid, who gets hooked up with the drug runners, could easily have served that purpose on her own with just a little bit of extra work on the plot. What do they bring to the investigation beyond an extra warm body to watch a door here or there? On one occasion, the presence of Belinda, herself a security officer, remember, causes him to abandon a lead in order to protect her from harm. This is 1969, and although that was a long time ago to be judging against sort of more modern standards, Diana Rigg was a thing. The girls are introduced as brains and beauty, yet they use neither. Even the beauty side might have been useful when Sherman needs to investigate the club that the drug smugglers are using as a front. Why does he need 2 of them at all when they follow each other around, only being split up when MacLean needs to put one of them in harm's way but protect the other? And the final page, which is among the more awful endings that I've read, reveals the why. Spoiler alert. MacLean wants to have his cake and eat it by killing one of them to be gritty, but still having a romantic interest for his lead at the end. And the fact that she learns nothing from this and loses her job in the process seems par for the course for a really poorly handled character. In conclusion, I really enjoyed the first 40 pages of this. The combination of a little grit with a dash of cynicism drew some premature comparisons with Bond and Marlowe, and perhaps it was the lofty expectations that those comparisons drew that made the second half of this novel seem like something of a disaster. MacLean wastes his 2 female leads utterly, introducing a third damsel, Astrid, who relegates his Sherman's assistants to being superfluous eye candy. His plot doesn't know if it's a pastiche or parody, and acknowledges and mocks tropes it shamelessly indulges in. Our hero is as subtle in his methods as his namesake, and about as clever. Perhaps the repeated blows that Sherman takes to his head should have led to a concussion substitution around the time that MacLean runs out of inspiration and starts to dredge for contrivances to try and maintain his previously witty and fun narrative. If you're determined to read MacLean, I'd recommend Where Eagles Dare over this, and if you're after a drug smuggling themed thriller from the era, then Bagley's Spoilers also came out in 1969 and is a far superior effort. 1969 was also the year that this came out, and perhaps somebody should look into the possibility of lawsuits if these covers aren't all by the same person. But MacLean's effort is the weakest of the 3 and is not recommended. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you ring the bell, I will see you in the next one. Bye.